Hello, and welcome to another week of the Story Arcs podcast. I am your co-host, Mike.
And I'm your co-host, Alex.
And today we will be concluding our discussion of Everything by Christopher Cantwell and I.N.J. Culbard, and lettering by Steve Wands, and edited by Karen Berger, which I thought more than ever in this one I can tell.
This is, I think, we hinted at it the last couple of weeks here that this was a COVID shortened book, and I think when you're dealing with a mystery story that this book essentially is, correct? Like at its core, there's something being hidden from the reader and
That's
the
exactly
characters. Right. So that means there has to be some sort of reveal, and how you handle that reveal, I think, comes down to, again, not just the creators. You can have a plan and all that, but I think having a good, smart editor can help, and especially with a book like this that. Reading it again, I truly feel like they were setting up a next arc, and then the world shut down and they had to pivot and instead move towards their end game. And I think they're having an experienced editor, an experienced editorial team, people that know what they're doing, and can be that kind of fluid and agile. From a storytelling standpoint, I think really helped, because I really do feel like you read the first issue of this volume, which they call Chapter 1, because again, by this point, the single issues had been, whatever been solicited had been canceled. But what would have been issue 6, I feel like that sets up what the world could be, and then immediately in issue 7, you get the reveal of the Vrom and what Mr. Gooder is up to, and as soon as that happens, you're in the end game. As soon as that happens, right, you have to get to the end. But I don't think that had to happen in issue 7 / chapter 2 of this volume. I think it feels like it was put there because they knew they were wrapping it up. But if this book had a chance,
which is a lot better than sticking it on the last page of issue 9, and then having just one issue after.
And again, from what I recall, back in 2020. I believe issues 6 and 7 were solicited, meaning they hadn't gone much further than that. So I feel like 6 may have been done and maybe 7 was in the works, and they were able to pivot through 7 and then finish the story up with what would have been 8, 9, and 10 for the final parts of the book. So I think because the book was still in process, I think that they were a little more, that allowed a little more flexibility for their storytelling. I have absolutely nothing to back this up other than, like, I've read a lot of comics and I've thought about this a lot. And it just seems to me like there's a world where this entire second arc could have just been exploring the weirdness in the town. And you spend more time with trying to figure out, or maybe not figure out, but being shown what those orange and blue flowers are, which we find out are these, like, psychoactive Vrom encoded, that they release people from the mind control,
right?
They bring people back from whatever's hurting them. But I think you could have really delved into what's going on with the city and kind of how the store is like, what kind of effect the store really has on what it means to be happy, and how people in the town are trying to find happiness, and really dig down on that, on some of the weirdness and some of the presentation there before you get to the actual reveal to finish the story up.
My counterpoint would be that, I don't, there are a million ways this could have kept going. But they clearly knew when they sat down that we're writing the end game here.
Yes. Once they started the end game, they knew how they were going to get there.
As soon as they sit down for volume 2, I think they knew, like, this is the last stretch. We're not doing, 6 arcs or whatever, because, like, the backstory, going back to World War I, those flashbacks, I felt like, oh, that was the right amount of that. And in a 6-volume series, that either would have been a whole trade by itself, it would have been like trade 3, they have the dinner scene, they cut back and they do all of that, or they would have done, like, we're slowly tracing his journey, so 1 out of every 6 issues going forward, shows him in the
Yeah, okay.
the 1910s, the 20s, the 30s, the 40s kind of follows his journey with the Vrom while we start to see like, oh my gosh, this is emerging, this is overlapping, and I think it would have just been too much. That said, the downside, so I thought that was the upside. Is the upside is like it shrinks certain story elements that have a tendency to get out of control in long form storytelling, and it condenses those down, pares them down to the essential, and gets right to the idea. So it gave me like the right amount there. The downside is they felt the need to wrap every character, and having our like super agent spy guy just like be a suicide bomber felt really lame. Like that felt like the oh shoot, we got to wrap that guy up somehow.
Well, and so I guess my pushback would be I do agree that when kind of streamlining towards the end, you lose all fluff and filler. At least, hopefully, if you're telling the story right,
Right.
once you're focused on the end. So the idea of expanding the story out may have allowed more room for that. I guess the way I see that is that we wouldn't get the flashbacks extended. We would either get different or more characters. Like our eventual suicide bomber from Cleveland. Like we know nothing about him. There's a world in which we could have gotten a partial issue with more of his backstory and actually seen what happened at this Cleveland store, which would have been fun to go into a whole other store, see a different thing, with what we know as the reader already about everything, and then to go into a flashback and see how that affects another town. I mean, I think there are ways where we could have gotten additional flashbacks, an additional story, an additional character, without having to like elongate the stuff we did get. Because I'm with you there. I think from
Yeah, all I'm
specifically,
saying is there's like, five or six really good ways to extend the story and 100 bad ways to do it.
and
And I
that's
think
fair.
that's true of every story. That's not this
That is
story.
true. Yeah, yeah. I will say what I agree with though, in specific to Marshall Gooder and his backstory through World War One and Mr. Bear and all that, the amount we got of his story to see where he was, how he progressed through his career to meeting the Vrom and then getting to where he is to open up everything. His specific journey, I think we got the exact right amount of. I'm with you on that. If this story had gone on longer and we got more and or different character backstories, I don't think I want any more with Mr. Gooder because I think we did get the
That's
right
exactly what
amount.
I'm saying. Yeah, that's
Yeah,
that's
yeah,
all
yeah,
I'm saying,
yeah.
really.
With specific to him, I think so. Maybe it's about that applies to other characters to see more about them and maybe get a little more into their life. We got a little bit with Rick through Vietnam and all that stuff. So, but I think there's a way to do that. But you're right. When it comes to Mr. Gooder and we see his arc, because ultimately it kind of comes down to this guy who presumably starts out like a genuinely or he wants to be a good person. He wants to make people happy. He wants to help, and then he's given the tools to do so by the Vrom. And through the arc of that, it's his corruption through conflating the idea of, I guess, capitalism with happiness. That we supply the things that people need, and if we tell them to be happy, they will be happy. And that's manifesting through commerce and all of that. And so seeing his arc and the corruption of his character, I thought was that was the exact right amount for what we knew about that character going into this volume, because he's only just introduced at the end of volume one. So given what our time with him and his ultimate importance in the story, I think we got the perfect amount for his story to understand kind of what his character motivation is and what his character arc was from being the guy that comes back from World War One selling these teddy bears at the train station to the person that could justify mind controlling people into buying stuff from his store.
Yes. And I loved that his slight misstep in his well-intentioned pursuit led him to become the ultimate villain. It's the thing that, and I think, another interesting reveal was, I assume I read this correctly, but I was reading it last night right before I went to sleep. It's a time loop, right?
Yes, presumably. Yes.
And I think, had we been following Sarah's childhood flashbacks for like 10 issues, and you're
That
like,
doesn't work.
wait,
Or
well,
it's
I
gotta
was
be
gonna
done
say, I
totally
think
differently.
it would be the total Christopher Cantwell thing of just like dropping 2 or 3 pages into each issue, and you're just like, what the hell am I reading? Like, what does this have to? It's like some little girl with orange and blue flowers, and then halfway through you find out her name is Sarah, and it's like, okay, and then on the very last one, it coincides with the
With the
actual
actual ending
end.
of
Yeah.
Laurie's conscience
And then
being
you
sent
realize,
back.
oh, I've been reading Lori and Sarah's origin the whole time. I think that to me has the vibe of this book, and it really wouldn't surprise me if that's something that
I
may have
could buy
happened.
that, that is, I guess that does go along with what I was saying about spending more time in flashback with other characters. Sarah slash Lori is one that I was thinking of. So I guess in a way I do agree that there are there was story to mine there. I guess the way I'm thinking about it in terms of deployment, you're thinking of like drop a page or two here, kind of like
Yeah.
completely out of context, and then keep going with
Basically
the
what
regular
he
story.
did for the whole first volume. It's
Yeah,
like,
yeah, yeah.
and I think it started that way again here too. Like I remember issue 6 being a very light text issue,
Again,
just
yeah.
kind of catching you up on all the scenes. And I thought it was very interesting to read the inside flap of volume 2, where it was like, in case you missed it, I'm
Oh
like,
yeah,
for the
there's a
love
catch
of
up.
God,
Yeah,
go read volume 1. Like, do,
yeah.
do not try to catch up on a trippy book like this by just jumping in and be like, well, the cover. But I say that as if everyone who acquires this got it from a comic shop that has both in stock. If
Yes.
you're like, you know, a kid at Half Price Books or Goodwill or something, and you find a trade paperback like this, and you're like, well, this looks kind of cool, and you pick it up and read it, it goes back to that every issue is someone's first issue, even in like a prestige, miniseries or an indie series like this. It still has that potential. Once it's out in the world, you don't control the audience.
Well, and again, the gap between when this final volume came out and either when issue 5 was released and then trade volume 1 was, I mean, we're talking like it's over a year. So, I think I mentioned in the Zero that, I read the first 5 issues, and that was that. And then, COVID shut everything down. And then this book was on the solicitations calendar. Then it went away, blah, blah, blah. And then all of a sudden it comes back and it's published and I didn't know about it. And then when I found it and saw it, I picked up the second trade and realized I have to reread the first 5 issues again, because of course, I had them. And so I had to pick up the trade again and reread that so I can go into volume 2. Because, yeah, I read, even me, I remember at the time I read that little blurb on the inside flap to catch it back up. I read
Right.
that and was like, yeah, no, that's not enough for me. I got to go back.
Right.
So it made, because it was bringing back enough of the story for me that I realized how much I didn't remember. So I had to go back and, do it all. But I guess you are right though. If you are kind of coming from that mindset of every comic is someone's first, I think you have enough there to know, what's going on with the story and the plot. But what
Right.
you miss,
The reveal kind of washes over you.
yeah, what you miss is the weirdness of the vibes that they set up in that first trade.
Well, and I can't imagine finishing this and then going back and reading the first one and finding the first one profound, after the mystery's out of the box. I mean, maybe
That is true. Yeah, maybe so. Maybe so. I mean, you have
it's
that.
still a beautiful first volume. I mean, like,
Yeah.
it's worth it just to go back and read those like commercial pages,
The fake ads
in
and all that.
Yeah,
No, yeah.
everything ads.
Yeah. But I think there is something of when you I'm trying to put my head in the mindset of not rereading this, but reading it volume 2, then volume 1. So reading volume 1 blind, but knowing that the mind control is a very specific plan that is meant to force people to be happy because the founder of everything thinks he is the chosen one. That puts a very different spin on volume 1 to read through and see when people who don't accept or can't accept the mind control like spontaneously combust.
Right.
You know, when you see like Ebb, who's fighting it, or it's not as strong as him, he's dying slowly and horribly and painfully. You know, that's hard to square. Or it's a completely different light on those results, I guess, if you know what the underlying meaning is already. Yeah, I wouldn't recommend that. I wouldn't recommend that. I think you can go back and reread it once you know, but to read it the first time in that order, yeah, I'm not with that. Read it in publication order. There's
Right.
a one on volume one and a two on volume two. Read them in that order and eliminate any of these possibilities.
Yeah. The main thought I had on Goodard, and I think this is really all that needs to be said about him, in addition to what we already said, is I thought of the John Stuart Mill quote, which of course I don't have the quote memorized, but he has a quote to the effect of, "You can't ever achieve happiness by aiming for it. You have to be fixed on something else and find happiness along the way. But anyone who aims at happiness will always, miss it."
Well, and that I mean that's hammered home. I typed a bunch of different quotes out here from this volume, and so many of them are along the lines of you can't force this. You can't force happiness. You can't
Right.
make people be happy. And I think that's reflected in Laurie, right? When there's a moment there when Mr. Bear, when we see Laurie here, she seems to be super bought into everything. Like she has totally drunk the Kool-Aid in the way that everyone else in the town has. And then we get that moment from Mr. Bear. He says he scans her and he realizes like, no, hold up. You're not under the influence of the audio mind control. Like you're actually happy. Like you are genuinely happy. You achieved the thing that we're trying to get, that Mr. Gooder is trying to force everyone on, and that's what makes you different. You are actually happy because you weren't trying to be. We didn't make you. You didn't work on you before, but you found a way to be happy.
Right.
And so,
I mean,
yeah,
she always wanted to be happy.
yeah.
But it
But
was when she let go of that pursuit that she actually
yes,
found it. And, that's obviously something Gooder is incapable of doing.
yeah. Well, but that is the ideal he was reaching for. That's what he was trying to do when he started. But again, the idea that whatever his noble and good intentions were, they get corrupted along the way. And now he thinks, well, we can't, you know, it's like people can't be left to their own devices to find out what makes them happy. I'm going to make them happy. But yeah, you're absolutely right. The idea that it's one of those things that you can't force, you can't fake. There is they go back to the kind of the story setup of characters hearing, listening to, and then repeating lines from a television show or movie or something like that.
Yeah.
We had it early on, and there is I think when they're at dinner, right? There's two people talking on the television about like a rodeo clown and saying how like you can't pay, you can pan on the
Right.
smile,
And then that
but
becomes like the refrain for the
yeah,
book.
but the idea that like it's always going to be fake, and yeah, that is the idea of you can't force happiness. You can't tell people they're going to be happy or that they are
Or
happy.
yourself. I mean,
Yeah, that's I guess like that. I'm including
because that's
all
the thing
people.
is,
Yeah,
right. But
you
like
can't delude yourself. Yeah, you're
Gooder
right.
himself was so fixated on this goal that even the Vrom were like, it feels like something's a little off with you right now. He's
Yeah,
like, nope, never been happier. It's
yeah.
like the toxic positivity. And I think that's what this book is
Toxic. Yeah,
really about.
Yeah, that's good. You're right. Yeah, the idea of it's the worry, right? Of
I
people
mean,
who have on the rose-colored
yeah,
glasses and
I
are
once
too
had a boss
optimistic. Yeah.
who would, by his own admission, say that he was guilty of toxic positivity. Whenever you're trying to like problem solve in advance and like, hey, what about this? He's like, I think it's just going to work itself out. It's like, that's a terrible idea. His approach to most things was like, let's just all stick our heads in the sand and see if it works itself out. Let's go do a team building activity. I'm like, no. We need to look at the problem. Whatever the opposite of toxic positivity is, I think I'm that. But
I
you
mean,
know,
that's like crushing fatalism or
Yeah,
realism.
yeah, that.
Yeah.
That's me. So it was not a great pairing because
Well, isn't the
both of
goal to
us were
find?
so committed to our
Yeah.
positions that everything the other person did only reinforced our beliefs about ourselves rather than complement, because you have to be less extreme in your position. If he were like bent toward optimism but not necessarily like toxic positivity, and if I was like, yeah, I lean towards skeptical but am not all out a skeptic, then we would learn from each other. But this was in my 20s, and it's like
Yeah.
you just
Well,
can't
I mean,
you can't
the
learn some things.
ideal, right, is to split that difference, is to understand and recognize the reality of whatever situation you're in, right? To acknowledge
That's the
the
dream. Yeah, I
yeah,
mean,
yes, is to acknowledge all the things that are going on, both good and bad around you, being able to confront it, deal with it, but still have an attitude of like, we can get this done, even though you recognize the potential pitfalls and perils, as opposed to right the blind positivity of just like, yeah, it'll work out, it'll be fine, or that crushing cynicism of just like, no, everything's terrible, you know? So yeah,
right.
the idea is to be somewhere in the middle there. And yeah, you're right. Mr. Gooder has convinced himself that he is fine because he's doing this for the greater good in his mind.
Right.
He's holding off the hold on, what we the Hapax Legemon, which is the great evil that the Vrom are kind of holding at bay. This reminded me of as I was reading this again. Did you ever see The Cabin in the Woods?
No, that I think I remember the hype around this, but I think the title alone, I was like, not up my alley.
Yeah.
And then so many people afterwards were like, no, 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 it's not exactly what it sounds like it is. It's
Yes.
so up
Yeah.
your alley.
Yeah.
But then I
Yeah.
never circled back. Is it like Chris Hemsworth or someone?
Yeah, it was Chris Hemsworth. In it, it was filmed before he was cast as Thor, and then it sat on the shelf for a while, and then all of a sudden, Thor comes out. And they're like, "Hey, we got Thor in this movie." But for well, I can't talk about it without spoiling it, so I'm going to spoil it if you don't mind. And
I
anyone
don't care
listening,
about spoilers at all.
yeah,
Like, I am so much more likely to watch something if I know how it ends because I'm
okay,
like,
great, yeah.
I want to know it's good.
As am I. So real quick, I'm going to spoil Cabin in the Woods for anyone who hasn't seen it, and so if you get angry, just keep
You've had like
hit the
15 years,
hit
get
the
around
fact.
to
Yeah,
it.
it's much longer than that. So its setup is very like any other young person horror movie, right? Kids go on camping trip. They're in this weird, creepy the cabin or whatnot, and then terrible things happen to them. And what the reveal is, and they see it early, is that this whole thing is being controlled by some shadowy organization that is intentionally setting up people to be murdered. And that all the tropes of horror movies, the stuff that Wes Craven, dissected in Scream and all that, all those horror tropes on the type of characters and the types of kills and types of monsters and all that, that's all in service of the quote unquote greater good, in that these people have to be sacrificed in order to keep we'll call the old gods appeased and asleep. And if they don't get their ritual sacrifice, the old gods emerge and they destroy humanity and destroy the world. So every time there's a Nightmare on Elm Street or Friday the 13th or all those, the idea that all those horror stories, those kids, those young people have to die in that way as a sacrifice to save everybody. And that's what the reveal is. And so this idea here that we have to do this seemingly terrible thing to this group of people in order to fend off a much more terrible thing affecting a lot more people.
Right.
Like it's that kind of justification. So that's what it reminded me of. And it's easy to see at that point to how someone like Marshall Gooder could get corrupted, how his good intentions could go awry, because he's thinking, wait, it's on me, right? I'm the chosen one. They gave me the knowledge and the resources to carry out their mission. I'm the avatar of their desires. how do I do this? How do I get people? We need to bring peace and harmony and tranquility and happiness. How do I do all that? Well, it'd be a lot easier if I could just make people, you can, and you justify it being like, well, if I don't do this, then this terrible thing comes. So, I like that they made Gooder like not some, mustache twirling
Right.
psychopath,
He's not a
they
Bond
gave him,
villain.
yeah,
Yeah.
they gave him the path of good intentions is, road to hell, things like that. I like that the idea that it was little by little broken down of him thinking and believing he was doing the right thing. And what it lead and at some point, like he's so far past the Rubicon that like he can't turn back now. And we see that, right? That he turns into the thing that the Vrom is trying to prevent. He turns into the Hapax Legion and becomes the monster. He becomes the evil. And so that's the thing, like that's the corruption that the Vrom were trying to ward off. And yet, in his pursuit of that goal, he turns into the very thing that he was trying to prevent, and it's another layer of metaphor and that's kind of built into the story.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I always enjoy that trope of like you've become the thing you were trying to stop.
Yes.
Almost every version of it, because I feel like it is so true of humanity that once we recognize a problem and we rush to a solution, we are almost always inclined to overcorrect. It's like, oh, here's this problem, so I'm going to do this, and this, and it's only realizing that there's some balance to
Yeah.
like I was saying about Oscar Wilde frequently contrasted cynicism and sentimentalism as like two equal and opposite errors. He was like, the cynic reacts to the sentimentalist, for being the way they are, and the sentimentalist reacts to the cynic for being the way they are.
Mm-hmm.
And they're both wrong, but in opposite directions. And whenever someone has some great epiphany or awakening, they will overcorrect, from sentimentalism into cynicism and commit the same error, but in the opposite direction. And
Well, it was just like what you were saying with you and your old boss, right? When you're so far on the ends here, when confronted with opposition, you're more likely to double down
right, it's like, see,
on your own stance,
you've got
which is
this
away
problem.
from each other. Yes,
right.
yes,
It's like
yeah.
I've got a tool that solves one thing, and you happen to have the one thing that my tool solves.
Yeah.
Which is the same thing as Gooder here. He's
Yeah,
like,
actually, yeah. Mhm.
all your problems are lack of happiness.
Yeah.
And if all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail, right?
Yeah.
And
I
that's
think in his
definitely
case,
the Gooder situation,
he had a stuffed teddy bear.
right?
So
And what can't be solved by a stuffed teddy bear?
exactly, yeah. So this stuffed teddy bear makes people happy. So we're going to sell this, and the more we sell them, the more they're going to be happy. And so yeah, that's the slope he starts going down, and then said by the time I don't even know if he ever realizes it, if he ever really truly realizes what his corruption is. But even by the time he does, it's too late. He turns in. You're right. He turns into that very evil that he was, commissioned to try and stop. And there is. I am trying to think like it is one of those story tropes. I'm with you that always works on me, because you're right. There's a fundamental truth to that applies to in any way it's presented in story, however fantastical or magical or anything like it, however it's presented in a story, the metaphor always hits because on some base human level, I think people connect with that idea.
Yeah, well, it was a big trope in, I'm guessing you weren't part of this reading wave in the 2010s, like teen fiction dystopia things, but
I read yeah, no, I read a handful. You're talking about like Hunger Games, Divergent, stuff like that.
Divergent, Maze Runner.
Yeah, I read those three. If you picked the three that I read.
Okay, I was like, all three of those trilogies went, they went downhill in quality after the first one. Although I think Hunger Games was pretty solid all the way through.
Hunger Games, I think, was the solidest start
trilogy.
To finish.
Yeah,
I'm saying start to finish. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Well, and the supplemental Hunger, like don't get me started. The fifth Hunger Games book comes out this year. I've already got it pre-ordered. Very excited for that.
I have not read the fourth one. That's the prequel, right? That's the
The
Ballad
fourth
of
one is Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes,
Snakes.
which
Yeah,
is the origin story of President Snow
yeah. I have not read
from
that.
like the 12th Hunger Games, and the one coming out this year is the Hunger Games that Haymitch was in, which I think was the 50th.
These are like They're not.
They're
They're
standalone pieces, yeah,
oh,
in the universe of, and
okay.
it was actually like the fourth one was the best book. It was the
Oh,
best
oh.
written. It was the most compelling. It
So
was
so
crazy good.
you're saying if I should probably read that one then.
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay. All right. All
Yeah,
right. All
and
right.
five you should read. But anyway,
All right. Yeah.
I think that one a little less so. But like at the end of Divergent, it was like, oh, it was very similar. They were like testing for some DNA strand or something,
Yes. Yeah.
and
Same thing with you're right. The Maze Runner. Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
Same with the Maze Runner,
Trying
and
to
it
find a
was like
cure.
we're trying to find a cure. This is the last stage of humanity, and if we don't do this call on purpose, it's going to happen
Yeah.
anyway. And when I think of when this came out, I'm like, I don't know if Chris Cantwell would have been reading those things. I think as a screenplay writer, he probably was, because I would suspect he got asked to adapt some strand of teen dystopia fiction at some point. Like, what if you wrote this for screen? It's like, or you're just looking for yourself to say, oh, well, there's this popular wave of books.
I was gonna go on what you just said there. The idea that these things move in waves. You're right. This is the type of story, and this and large, like here's the story that's popular right now. So people are going to ride that wave. And so you'll get good versions of it, bad versions of it, mediocre versions of it, and then it'll kind of go away. And then maybe someone comes out with like the super prestige, nice version of that, like super high end version. But yeah, when there's a wave and type of story tropes that are just popular at the time. So yeah, I would imagine, if it's just in the ether,
Right.
in
Yeah,
and
yeah, yeah. I'm not
around,
saying it was a deliberate
yeah.
thing. It was
Yeah,
just like
okay.
that was the mood of the 2010s was,
Yeah.
all of these well-intentioned things, which I don't think they even realized like how prescient that was to, because when you think of like back to 2010, we were in a little bit of a lull. It was post the 2008 housing bubble, and we didn't really know what had gone wrong with the world, but we knew like somehow it's 2010, and I don't think the 2015 promise to us in Back to the Future 2 is going to be here. It's like there was like a little bit of disappointment. There was this little bit of like we tried good things and they just didn't work.
Well, but see, I think this is where a larger question about the function of art and society can play in. This idea of, you're right,
Right, life imitating art versus art imitating life.
but the fact that that's like an Ouroboros, right? That's a snake eating its own tail. And there's no beginning, no end there, because I think there's a reason why those books became as popular as they did when they did. If you're telling me in the 2010s that those books are quote unquote marketed or intended, let's say, towards a YA audience. So those are kids that are in their early mid-teens.
Yeah, they were
right?
born in like 98 to '04.
Yeah. So their obviously their earliest
95
memory,
maybe. Yeah.
their earliest memory legitimately might have been 9/11.
Right.
And then,
Well, I mean,
and then being mired in two wars, and then watching the economy collapse like multiple times. So this idea, and I think I remember something that Suzanne Collins talked about. Suzanne Collins is the writer of the Hunger Games, that she was specifically tapping into this idea that on the news you're seeing all this coverage of wars and conflicts and things like that, and what does that do to, I think, the younger generation when that's all they know. So I don't think it's unintentional that those things come out when they do, and they hit with that audience in that mind frame, even though, yeah, we are coming out of 2008 and what was President Obama's message in 2008, right? It was hope. And so it's the idea of how do we not work against, but the world is one way, we're trying to imagine it to be another, and it's a reaction to that. And so I think pointing out that idea of the world is ending, and maybe specifically that the children are the future, Thank you, Whitney Houston. The idea that
Right.
young people, the idea that, what, the adults in the world, we screwed it up. You know what? It's like, tapping the chest, our bad. We screwed it up, and you guys are left with it. And that's why you have books like The Hunger Games, Divergent, Maze Runner, that you have to be put through these tests because you have to be the ones that come out, to make a new world, a better world, whatever it is.
Well,
And
and just to like reinforce that, come at it, look at it from the other angle. What successful dystopian franchise was there in the 90s with the booming economy and the dot-com? Nothing. And it's not like I'm sure there were writers writing dystopias at that time, but they were not finding an audience.
I would say, and it didn't show up until the very, very end of the decade when our dystopians ended up being things like the Matrix.
Y2K. Well, yeah.
Y2K. And it was technological at that point. But yeah, you're right. It all comes down again with cycles and these things just being in the air and a general sense of the world. And so applying this back to everything here, I think there was something really interesting about this book straddling the COVID-19 pandemic. This idea of searching for happiness, and especially I think a character like Lori, who is so isolated. She feels so apart from everything. And of course, we find out why. We get a specific reason why. It's because she's a, descendant of the Vrom, and also maybe the character of Sarah, the old woman, the blind woman, there's whatever it is there, but she has this isolation and this sadness that comes from it. And these are people that are also looking for connection. Shirley's looking for human connection because she's effectively a robot. Same with Ed. Like all these characters are trying to find happiness, and they are a lot of times they're looking for that through connection. And so to have this book straddle a time when we literally couldn't connect with people, when we couldn't be around them, when we couldn't do these things, I think it shines I don't know if it's intentional or unintentional light, a little bit of a weird lens on this volume when you remember where the world was when it came out.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that's going to be I think we don't know yet like what the real fallout of COVID has been on literature and comics and everything else.
We're still too close to it, I think. Yeah, I think this stuff like this that is.
But if you notice, like the theme that everyone was talking about in the much maligned like MCU phase 4 and 5, all of which came out during or post COVID, all of them were about grief. Like,
just about.
In some way, it's like grief or trauma. Yeah. And I think people were like going back and watching the old ones to feel happy and inspired because they were like, right, I've got grief and trauma when I'm not watching TV. I don't need it while I'm watching TV. And I think the Marvel creative teams just could not help but imbue their real-time feelings into the world. That and like the correlation between the blip fallout and COVID fallout was like
I mean, that's
trying to return to normal when there's no such thing as normal. Like we've never done this before.
Yeah. That maybe just be unfortunate timing on their part, but I think that's an interesting kind of view there. The idea that so often art reflects kind of the mirror of where society is. Not often, but like you said, the idea that you think about where we were, like the MCU starts in 2008, right? And you think about kind of what we were, where we were as a country, and what our mindset was as we got towards the end of that through like 2016 into 2020 or into 2019, I guess, when Endgame comes out. And you're right, there is a lightness to it, even though there's loss there, but there isn't grief and trauma. There's loss and defeat, but there isn't grief and trauma. And then the world falls into that, and the MCU also delves into that, versus this idea of kind of maybe working against, like, the world is on fire, everything's terrible, and so we're going to have something that's uplifting, something that is maybe more aspirational, which is very interesting to talk about now, because as we're recording this in early 2025, two of the most anticipated movies of the year are Superman and Fantastic Four First Steps. Both of those movies on the surface appear to be, for lack of a better word, inspirational, aspirational.
Right.
You know, they appear to be.
Well, and for Marvel to do it, they were like, this is going to have to be a time piece.
Yeah. Yeah.
They're like, we can't do an inspirational piece in our world.
But even though another movie they have coming out is Thunderbolts, which doesn't seem like the lightest and most inspirational thing, but the tone seems different. The tone seems a little more wryer. It's a little more sardonic. It's a bunch of bad guys, right? Trying to be good guys. So the idea that there's humor in it. We'll see about Captain America: Brave New World, which has not come out yet as we're recording this. That maybe seems a little heavier.
It will be out for a week by the time this drops.
Yeah. So I will have already seen it by the time you're listening to this, but as we're recording it now, haven't yet. But again, the idea of, and I think what you're saying about what that lag time is, we haven't seen what the effect of something like COVID is going to be. I think you potentially see the effect on a book like this when things are delayed.
To bring it all back home.
But there's a scramble for it, right? There's a scramble of how do we deal with, how to wrap our story up, and how do the things we're going through now maybe apply to the themes of this book. And I think we see a little bit of what that effect might have been in a book like this. The larger effect on art, I think, is what we're seeing coming into this year. I think there's a reason why Superman and Fantastic Four, as of right now, feel the way they feel. Now, maybe in the future, you're listening to this and those movies are dark AF and everyone dies. Who knows? Maybe we're completely wrong. I'm going to place a bet right now that we're probably not, because that's what we look to art for.
We're not wrong about volume 1 of those series. Like, you know, the sequels will be darker, presumably.
Maybe so.
Because, everyone with that trailer dropped, they were like, James Gunn, if you kill that little dog, like in the comics, then...
Hold up.
You know,
Krypto's a super dog, much like Superman. He's not going to die, okay? Like, he can't die. He isn't your dog. The dog can fly. He has super strength. Krypto's going to be fine, folks. Don't worry about it. But just the fact that there's a cute dog in there, that they put Krypto in the movie, is because they are aspiring to something, because the world is back on fire again. And so we turn to our art to try to get that, maybe to get a respite of it. And so when you see what those influences are, or how the real world seeps its way into our storytelling, again, I think it's something to consider with a book like everything, because obviously COVID has a break to it, has an effect on this, but it was in the middle of its story, and then they're trying to end it, and then things happen in the world that you can't help but have that influence how you look at the story. And I'm not saying that maybe they didn't already have the ending exactly already laid out, maybe they did, maybe they didn't, I don't know, but the book ends and, like, everybody gets what they want.
Right. I mean, it's a much happier ending than I expected. But this is so much like, what's the other book we just finished where you said, I think it was Time Before Time, where you were like, this issue was always the last issue. It was just a matter of when to drop it. Like, it's always going to end this way. Yeah. It's just a matter of what road we take to get there and how long it goes. Because time could have gone for 100 issues, and that still would have been the final issue.
Because that last issue really felt like a coda, and because it's time travel, you could drop it. It doesn't matter where the characters end up in the narrative story. You can always end with that. Here, I don't know, and I'm not going to accuse Cantwell and Culbard of, like, altering their ending because the world is different when it comes out. But I am with you on the idea that this book ends a lot happier than I would have anticipated, even in the middle of volume 2. It ends with effectively all of our main characters reaching or being given peace and serenity and happiness. However,
anyone who had a name and anyone we cared about.
Yeah. And it's
okay.
Different for every character. it isn't everyone gets everyone gets the happiness that they were seeking, or the closure that they needed or wanted. And yeah, I would not, and I'm not saying it's a bad ending. I think it works. I think it reads well, but I am with you in that it the first time through it felt unexpected, that you didn't think, even with the everything when you introduced the giant Vrom interdimensional godlike, when you introduce the weirdness of that aspect, and the corruption story arc of Mr. Gooder, all of that, to end where everyone gets to be happy.
Right.
I guess does make sense, but it did feel unexpected. I almost said out of place, and
it's not out of place, because it actually reinforces
exactly.
the point we were making earlier, which is that all of these characters were seeking the good of someone else, the happiness of someone else, and they themselves are rewarded with happiness. Whereas Gooder was seeking his own happiness and is rewarded by becoming.
Yeah, well, he was seeking his own happiness through the guise of making everyone else happy.
Right.
Yeah.
He really believed it. He's a true believer.
He had deluded himself, absolutely. That's why I didn't want to say it was unfitting. That was the first word that came to mind, but that didn't seem right, because it is thematically correct. The idea that a book about what is happiness and what makes us happy ultimately ends with our main characters achieving that, or being allowed to have that. But it was unexpected because of some of the weirdness of the story. And again, just these layers of mystery, but again, mysteries that you're not, like, you may or may not feel the need. You have to have, like, do we have to get to the bottom of every single mystery? Do we have to explain everything that's there? I don't know if their intention was to really do that. Going back to what we called out last week, that Christopher Cantwell himself called out, the idea that Twin Peaks had such an influence on him as a storyteller, and the work of David Lynch. And so the idea that sometimes mysteries are just mysteries because that's just what they are, and you don't need to put a button on everything. And so I think this book was built coming out of that first volume to have those layers of mysteries. And you, the reader, maybe not being certain as to either what's important or what's going on or what is real, or you're meant to question all of that. And I think because maybe the book got cut a little short and they had to get to the end, you get those answers, and those answers all make sense. But it just, halfway through the run, it didn't seem like that's where the story would have been going. But once you got there, it did make sense. I think that's how I feel about the end.
Yeah. How I felt about the ending was, surprised, the last thing I expected was to be surprised, which is funny, because it was just like, if you asked me in volume 1 in last week's discussion, is this a character-driven book? I would have said absolutely not. But it is a character-driven ending, which is so fascinating, that he pulled that little magic trick there. So when I finished issue 5, which it's issue 10 technically, but the way they have the chapters in volume 2,
chapter 5, yes,
chapter 5,
it's the final
issue.
2. Yeah.
When I finished that, I thought, wow, at least the first 3 chapters in this didn't really matter. Like the whole, there's going to be this big confrontation in the store and there's going to be a big fight scene. None of it matters.
Yeah.
Like what matters is that conversation with the Vrom at the end, and how they are able to perceive not just someone's alignment with them, but their deservingness of happiness. And they also are able to perceive the path to their happiness. Because when they say, it's 3 very different outcomes.
Yes.
It was very Wizard of Oz, honestly.
Yeah,
it was oh, do you like the Tin Man wants a heart, right? Literally, like the robot lady made by the bad guy wants to be a real person and to have a heart, and that's what she gets. And so I think they perfectly ended everything. Well, they left the door open to return to now. Like if they ever wanted to write a 5 or 10 issue series on now, It would be really
I mean,
interesting.
they could. I don't know if I'd be in for that. I will say though, I guess if anyone got kind of, I mean, I was gonna say Ebb got the short end of a stick, but I guess he was technically dead. So if your choices are being dead or being inside a teddy bear and being alive, I guess you choose the teddy bear.
Yes,
Yeah,
I would
yeah,
choose the teddy bear.
yeah. Versus being dead. Yeah, I guess so.
Yeah,
And
no,
and I guess at that point he didn't have much of a choice. It wasn't like he was an active participant. He had already kind of essentially effectively died in that final attack there. But yeah, the Wizard of Oz thing is interesting. The idea that yeah, everyone gets their own different ending, but they get the happiness
everyone
that
gets
they were looking
happiness,
for.
but it's a different thing for each person, which is
Yeah,
what
yeah.
Gooder didn't get.
Yes, yeah.
Gooder
That
was
the
trying to
problem
do a one cut or one size fits all.
yeah,
You know, here's what happiness is. I'm telling you what happiness is.
yeah.
It's this
You're
bear. It's
going to
this
be
stuff.
happy.
It's this
Yes.
store. You will take this and you will be happy.
Yeah. The beatings will continue until morale improves. It's that kind of thing. Which they talk about too. The idea that
That's such a
everything
good
that
comp.
yeah, but the idea that everything came out of fear, and one of the quotes you have is the idea that that without happiness one is lost to darkness. It builds reliance, dependence. You can't be happy without us. The only true happiness comes from us, and there's room for nothing else. So the idea of not only we're telling you're going to be happy, you're going to find happiness here. You're only going to find happiness here. And there is happiness not just in any other store. There's only happiness in this place.
Well,
It's all consuming. It's not just the consumerist aspect, the buying, the capitalist aspect. This is the literal only place you are ever going to feel happy. Not at your home, not at your school, not at your work, not with your family, not with your friends, anything like that. So it's that idea of if you're not here, you're not happy. Ergo, when I am here, I must be happy. That's the thing that Gooder was playing on, and that is a thing that doesn't work. You can't make that be. You can't rely on the absence of something for being the driving motivation, for being as strong as the presence of actual happiness.
yeah, yeah. So I think it's actually ends up being a really fascinating book. It is in no way what you would expect from volume one. It's not even really what you would expect from reading the cover.
Yeah, yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
I think when I think back to the pitch of week one of the Zero episode, where it's like, here's how the series is described, and I don't think anyone would expect something as substantial as
It's all about the store and what the store is, and that's true. It's still about what the store is doing, but that's only
but it's really what the
the
store is a
plot driver.
manifestation of.
Yeah, it's the
Right.
plot driver. Is there a version of this book? Well, I'm sorry. Of course, there could be. Would you be interested in a version of this story that is more overtly character driven from the jump, where it's clear that this story is about because we had this question early last week, right? Which character do you connect with? Who do you think you're supposed to connect with? And we basically dismissed everybody except Laurie and Shirley at the end. Shirley starts out as a non-entity, and we see her slow progression towards the end where she becomes interesting. Laurie was the only one in that first book that had any sort of arc or story to it. Everyone else seemed pretty one note and pretty boring and just there to move the plot along. Would can you envision a book knowing where this book ends and how it ends and on the notes that it ends on? Would a book with the same setting but a more focused on character approach, would that be a book you'd be interested in? And can you see that being successful in a way where they drop some of the
Yeah, I got you.
overall mystery, the weirdness of it, and we just really drill down and we focus on these characters, but still in a way that they still have kind of the oddities and the mysteries and the weirdness of the town and the store. Is that a book you'd be interested in? You think that could work?
Okay, so I can envision one iteration of it, but it would come like I don't think any writer is I want to be careful how I say this. I don't think any writer is capable of doing it just from the conventions of modern writing. But I think if we had actually started in real time with Lori in her other town where she's a police officer or paramedic or whatever she was, and you know, at the end of the first issue, she accidentally cracks the guy's
Yeah.
rib cage and he dies, and she's traumatized. In issue 2, she moves to this new town and starts noticing weird things, and we stay with her. You know, she meets oh my gosh, the blonde woman.
Shirley.
Shirley. She meets Shirley. She saves the life, you know, in the
Yeah, the
everything store. But we stick with her POV. I think that's a pretty compelling character piece. And you still get all the weirdness of the world, but you just get it through the eyes of one person. And that's really where we get a lot of it anyway, is,
It is.
you know, she's the one who goes to the lighthouse. She's the one who the big twist is, which we haven't even mentioned. She's like a descendant of the Vrom or some hybrid.
Yes. Yeah.
And that was what they saw as the future of humanity. But it's interesting that they're like, yeah, you know, we want to spread our happiness and unity to your world, and we want to do that by like breeding with you. Well, like if they were like gooder, they would have started forcing that and killing anyone who didn't want to do that, right? But instead, they kind of sprinkle it in and just let it disperse slowly.
Let it run its own course.
Yeah, just kind of let it blossom. And I think that subtlety is the difference between the hero and the villain. It's just like everybody's after the same thing, and the means by which you act, you know, it's not just what you do or why you do it, but how you do it. And that's the differences between the good guys and the bad guys in the story, and in any good story. You know, there should be that parallel. You know, I remember there was some Batman writer who, not really at all profound, but it was just the first time I heard it put down, was like every villain, you know, that he was saying, you know, every villain I introduced to Batman represents some incomplete part of him that he will have to battle internally before he can overcome the external factor. And I was like, I think you could remove the word Batman, and that's just writing 101, right? It's your external foe has to represent some internal problem. And I think, however, I don't think that's the only way to write. I think that's just a really good way to write, because then I think I took that and universalized that. And if you take that framework and read Superman, you're not going to get Superman, right? Which I didn't for a long time. I think because it's not constantly pointing out character defects of Superman.
Yes. Yeah.
You know, he gets put in different binds, different quandaries, but so there is more than one way to write a compelling character story. But
that
for a very long time, that was my favorite.
That framework you outlined there, though, that is the bad guy with a point. Effectively.
Yeah, it's Killmonger, right?
Yeah.
Which I think is the best done on screen version of it.
But it's the guy who isn't just the Bond villain, who isn't just the mustache twirling evil guy. It's the guy, because there's a reflection of our protagonist in the villain, and it's the idea of it. Yeah, you're right. That there's some sort of mirror that he holds up. That either there's just like one small viewpoint that's skewed. There's something that's a little off, a little amiss, but because it's rooted in that base of, again, something that the hero is going to have to confront, something in them, a part of them that they've denied or overlooked, that this character then embraces, and thus becomes their downfall and their flaw. It inherently makes your villain, your bad guy, your antagonist, or whatever you want to call him, it makes them relatable, because you give them a point of view and you give them rationale for what they've done, even if you fundamentally disagree with what they end up doing, by giving them some basis of, again, good intentions, just like we see here with Marshall Gooder. He wants to make people happy. I'm sorry. He wants people to be happy.
Yeah, he wants people to be made happy.
He wants them to be happy, and he feels the only way that can happen is if he makes them happy, versus allowing them to be to find happiness. So there's nothing wrong with wanting a world where people are happy and the world is peaceful, and there is there is genuine tranquility and serenity and all this. That's not a bad thing to want for people. It's the idea that he doesn't trust them to find happiness on their own, or doesn't know how to cultivate a place where people can find happiness. He has to be in control of it. And that's that little twist of like, okay, well, I see the vision, but like, how you get there isn't working. And I think that's what the Vroms see, and that's what his downfall is. I do have one. I don't know how much you have left. I do have a question I do want to end on. So I don't know if you have
Yeah,
anything else you
that's
want to go
literally it's everything for me. And I think my like concluding or my the thought I thought I was gonna like enter with today was like when the ending was what it was, what was even the point of like the first three issues of this series?
And again, I think part of that comes into I think you can chalk that up to COVID shutting the story. Because if there was a whole, let's say there was just one extra arc that volume two, that the volume two we read, let's say this is a hypothetical volume three, and there's a volume two where we sit in the town and we get and you can imagine that being a mix of the randomness, the weirdness of those first few issues, and a little more character work. You get all that blended in together while the mystery of what the store is doing hangs over everything. If there's an expansion of that where you get some more stories, and not even more stories, just some more pages, like the stuff we got in those first three issues, the seeming choppiness, the randomness, the unease it puts the reader on. I think if you've gotten more of those in another volume that allowed Cantwell and Culbard to explore more of the town, explore more of the weirdness, and explore the characters deeper, I think it would have potentially could have made more sense as to what they set up in that first arc, and then transition a little smoother into the end of the story, which we got in volume two here. I think there could have been a bridge there where some of those things, because I think you're right, there's an abruptness to how the story starts and how the story ends. It makes sense, it's connected, but there is an abruptness. And I really do feel like they had more ideas planned and they had to scrap and just get to the end because that's all they had time to do. And I think,
well, and I really feel like
a little more room to breathe, not a lot, just a little
right.
more room to breathe.
I feel like there was a shifting of gears
yes.
that almost certainly would not have happened if this just came out 10 consecutive months.
Yes. Yeah, if there wasn't just, if the shutdown didn't happen, I absolutely think you're right that they had to get to the end faster than I think they probably wanted to. They got to the end, but I do think they generally got to the end they probably planned for. I don't think there was any major changes. I'm willing to say that they got to the end that they thought they were going to get to. They just got there faster than they intended. And that's why it feels so abrupt. And there's just it's a little rough in the transition of what they set up in volume one and then, cresting over the hill on the roller coaster and just getting towards the end. They missed out on some of the mini hills and the loops and the corkscrews in between on the roller coaster. They just went up and went down, and that's all they had time for.
Yeah. Yeah. But I think this is possibly, I would love to talk to Christopher Cantwell or I.N.J. Culbard about this, because I think this is the example of something unexpected happened. You didn't get to do exactly the book you wanted, but what ended up coming out was unexpected. And I think you and I read a lot of books. We talk about books every week. And I mean, did you feel disarmed by the ending the same way that I did?
Yes, again, because the idea that it was unexpected, not unearned, not out of place, but because of what had been set up. But when I sit and I think about it more, I think that the ending is fitting, which is why I said I think they got to the ending they were planning to. They just got there quicker than that. So
I think it might have been a little more rose tinted than it might have been.
It's possible, and that could be a reaction to the times when it was written. And maybe not everyone survives in the way that they do, whatever it is. But I think some of the ideas, the larger ideas of happiness, were clearly what the book is about, and they were always going to land on that in the finale or towards the end of the story. It just seems like they had to accelerate things, and they couldn't kind of sit and bathe and ruminate in some of the ideas that they had set up. But because of that, I think because of the quickness of the ending, yeah, I was off put a little bit by it because it was unexpected. I think just because you're not primed for the ending to come when it does, even though the end of book two is the end of the story. There's still an abruptness to it that I think in the moment put me off a little bit because you're not ready for it. You're not expecting it to end that way, but it still works in its own way. It absolutely is fitting for the story.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, those are all my thoughts. I have to say, with it, while I was reading it, I was thinking this is like a 3 out of 5 star book. And 5 minutes after walking away from it, I was like, it's probably 4 stars. I'm like,
I'd say 3.5, 4 star.
yeah, I was like, it ended up being, because when I read volume one, I was like, totally see it, totally get what we're doing here. Then you read the front cover of volume two, and you see the endorsement from none other than Gerard Way, and you're like,
Yeah.
nothing's ever made more sense.
Yeah. And you look back,
To
you're
get
like,
an
oh,
endorsement, it's like this is written so similarly to oh my god, Umbrella Academy, where it's like cut, juggle all these characters, big mystery, reveal. But in Umbrella Academy, each reveal opens a new set of questions, whereas here, all of the questions are wrapped, and
I
that's
will
really
say
the
though,
main difference.
I know that intro is from Gerard Way in volume one. If I hadn't read this book previously, like if sitting down and reading it now was the first time I'd ever read this book, on the back of volume two, there are 4 pull quotes. James Tynion the fourth, Jackson Lansing, who's part of the writing team of him and Colin Kelly, another writer that I love, Kelly Thompson, and Gerard Way. So like Tynion and Thompson are legitimately 2 of my favorite writers currently in comics. Lansing and Kelly are 2 guys that I will read anything that they put out right now because I'm always interested in it. And Gerard Way is Gerard Way. I haven't read it. He's hit or miss. Some stuff I've loved, but he's a name and someone out there who has a similar sensibility. So like just seeing those pull quotes on the back of this volume would have been enough for me to say, hey, you know what? If these people are in on it, then this is probably something I need to check out. Not a guarantee I'm going to like it, but just seeing the names that they pulled and the kind of stories that those writers and creators tell, is enough for me to jump in on. But I'm with you. Gerard Way was perfect for the first volume in terms of getting this book set up and kicking.
Oh, I was thinking his quote was stamped on the cover of my volume two as well.
Oh, well.
Who knows? But yes, although with those names, has there ever been an ending this happy from Tynion? Yeah.
I mean,
okay. So
maybe
on the
maybe
front
some
cover of
books.
my volume two, which is there could be several editions of it. It says a wonderfully bizarre, human, and ominous comic about true happiness with an uppercase H.
Yeah.
And then ... This is a great book, Gerard Way, the Umbrella.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. No, I mean, this is maybe a little more rosier than something that Tynion might write, but there are parts of it that feel. I mean, Kelly Thompson tends to write generally uplifting-ish stuff. But it just seeing those names there, like there's a reason you pull certain pull quotes from certain people on your book, right?
Oh, 100%.
You want to draw some kind of audience. You want to have some sort of expectation of it. And so, yeah, if I had seen those 4, not knowing what this book was, and just saw those 4 names on the back, that would have been probably would have been enough for me to check it out. That's enough to spark my interest because it's like, well, I like that guy, and that guy. I like all of them. So, if they lend their name to it, it seems to be worth jumping in for. So, yeah.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you all for reading it. Hopefully,
one last thing.
Yeah.
And maybe it's quick. I don't know. What is now at the end? What do you think?
That's a good question. I didn't give it too much thought other than I think it was meant to be. I mean, what I would have loved to see her do is open, not a huge store, but just like a little boutique shop
Mhm.
that is like, I'm not going to apply everything to everyone. I'm just going to do this one thing really, really well.
So but that's part of my question. Is now a store? Do they sell anything? And this is the kind of thing
Well,
that
that's the thing is that, yeah,
when
it
I
could
fir-
be
I
like
say,
a spa or resort or
when I
something.
first read it, you I'm not thinking about this because what you're getting is her explanation, which she says, behind these doors, you're going to find but one thing, that most precious thing of all, that one trinket that's more valuable than anything in this universe, this exact moment. And it's like, okay, so this is commentary on what everything was and contrasting that, yeah, blah, blah, blah. But now that I've reread it a couple of times for this discussion and thought about it, I'm thinking, what exactly is it? When you walk into those doors, like what do you think is there? Is it just like open rooms and couches for people to think about? Like, what is it? Because I've come to the conclusion that it's not a store. They don't
It's not a
sell
retail
anything.
story, right?
Yeah, 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 yeah.
They
It's
might
a
sell. They might have a
space.
lot of teddy bears, but
Yeah, yeah,
um,
maybe so. But I was curious if anything sparked for you as to what now might be now the store.
well, now the business or your
Yeah,
building
that's
or
true.
whatever.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I just said it wasn't a store.
Right. I think some type of I think it's probably the ultimate third space, which is that's 90s
Mhm.
talk that
Yeah.
Starbucks created. They thought like, well, we just need a space that isn't messy and cluttered and wind down mode like our house, but isn't high pace and stressed like our work office. We need that third place. And then they started doing it, and then indie coffee shops really took off. Then
Yes.
breweries became the thing,
Mhm.
and even right now, something like global beer sales are down like 24% in the last 5 years. So like the brewery bubble is bursting, and so I'm curious if now is like some type of third place that isn't based around a product, because as well intentioned as your local coffee shop owner is, they still need you to buy coffee and
I was gonna say
scones, right? Like,
capitalism still exists. Yeah.
right. And I have nothing like I delight in supporting those places.
Yeah.
I go there all the time, but the fact of the matter is there is some brass tacks there, and I think what she might be in the situation to do is create the completely magnanimous third space.
Here's the place where you can just be and exist.
Right. And it's not it's not a community rec center or YMCA where it's like, oh, it's a third space and it is philanthropic and it is da da da, but it's built around exercise,
Yeah,
or activity.
but you got to play racquetball.
Right, right. Racquetball or pickup basketball or something like that. This is a place to be a very zen-like place.
Sure,
That's
sure,
my
sure.
best. That's my
Yeah,
best guess, just based on like the architecture, the aesthetic. You know,
her little
it
speech
doesn't
there.
help
Yeah,
that like all of this sounds very Scandinavian, and she looks very Scandinavian.
yeah, yeah. It's like she went from working at a Target to opening an IKEA or something like that.
Right. It was
Is
an
that,
IKEA without products. It's
yeah,
just
yeah,
the
yeah.
showroom of IKEA.
Is
You can't buy anything. It's just the showroom.
That's fantastic. You just walk through and you see furnished bedrooms and kitchens. This is what it could be, but you can't buy. That's
Well, it's what the
I love that.
it's what the display section of IKEA is to my daughter.
Yeah,
My daughter's like,
yeah.
"Hey, we're in a house now." It's like, "We're not. You
not.
patently saw us walk through a parking lot and come in here." And she's like, "This is a comfy couch," and she starts laying down. She pretends to eat at the tables. It's that for adults.
Oh, that's you know what? That's what now is now to me.
Now
That's
is
what
the
it
IKEA showroom. Yeah.
It's IKEA showroom, no business, nothing you can buy, nothing for sale. It's just display. You can go in there and that's your place. I love that. That's fantastic.
Yeah, I think if Christopher Cantwell had social media, I think we would definitely ping him with that question when this episode comes out. As it stands, we may ask I.N.J. Hubbard and see if we can get
We got to see what we can find. Yeah, we got
something chiming in somewhere. Because I suspect they had some conversation about what it was, even though they chose not to reveal it, so that you could have this because it's asking the reader, what do you think is in the happiness store?
Yeah,
Right? It's like the whole thing was, here's Gooder's idea of what store-bought happiness is,
yeah,
and now it's like, here's this store-looking thing, and what it has in it is happiness. Whatever the reader fills in the blank with is exposing your
yeah.
biases on the issue.
The idea that it's about now, it's about the moment, it's about living and being present. This is what's important. This is what happiness is. This is what living is. Yeah, no, I love that idea. If we got a chance to talk to one of them, that'd be.
Yeah. As is, give us a retweet and maybe even a quote, and tell us what you think is inside the Now building, as you share with the world. I definitely think IKEA showroom is the idea to beat, but we'll see.
I'm gonna have a hard time beating that now, because I was thinking something that's like, fountains and waterfalls and bonsai trees and a very serene Zen-like garden,
right?
And you went to,
but someone programmed for working in everything store. What would their
true.
version of the Zen place be?
Yeah,
it would be,
yeah.
all of the products, but no sales catalog.
But we're definitely not going to explore the fact that my mind went to an Eastern setup and your mind went to a Nordic Scandinavian setup.
Right.
We're definitely not gonna dig into that.
The guy with the last name Jorgensen went to Scandinavia. What are the chances of that?
Yeah, we're not gonna explore that anymore.
I don't want to pull at that thread. So anyway, thank you for listening. Please like and subscribe and share and follow us everywhere. And we don't put any effort into this, but we are now on YouTube, and it is audio only on YouTube, which I think is weird, but they got rid of Google Podcasts. Anyway, we picked up a handful of subscribers there, so shout out to YouTube listeners. But also, it doesn't hurt you, so go ahead and subscribe on YouTube too. Who knows? You might be sitting in your office and, I don't have a podcast player on my computer. I have it on my phone.
No, do I? On my phone, yep.
But I listen to a lot of podcasts at my computer, so either on Spotify or YouTube or somewhere. So, jokes on me, because I make fun of this medium and then I end up using it. So, anyway, find us everywhere, follow us everywhere, share us everywhere, and we will see you back here with another series and another creator spotlight next week.